So now Kim Gordon, as we said previously, plays no instruments, but she still wants to make loud and raucous music. So she heads to a conservatory for the next few years to really buckle down and study music theory. Just kidding. She picks up a bass and is ready to go instantly. Welcome to 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and guys whose wives are really tired of hearing about the evolution of stereo panning techniques get together to tell the backstory on some of the most influential albums of all time as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Now, if you don't know today's album super well or not at all, no worries. We're going to guide you through it. We're going to play song clips while we dive into the backstory of this artist and this album. And along the way, we're going to be breaking these songs down musically, culturally, spiritually, to offer you both our praise and our nitpicky complaints as musicians. And at the end of all that, we're going to vote on whether this album is really a must listen before you die. Now, I must warn you that we came here to learn, but mostly to laugh and have a bit of fun. As I mentioned, we're musicians ourselves. We understand how difficult it is to make truly great art, and we come from a place of love and respect for the craft. But we also enjoy nitpicking and complaining, as the title of the show suggests. So, bottom line is, there's no sacred cows here. We will not be treating this artist or this album with any particular reverence. So, superfans, you have been warned. My name's Rob. I've been playing, performing, and recording music since I was a wee lad, and I have formed some opinions in that time, let me tell you. Now, tonight we will be discussing an album that People magazine, while reviewing it relatively favorably, called the sonic equivalent of a toxic water dump. I'm talking, of course, about Sonic Youth's Evol. So let's get the show kicked off by playing a clip of the opening track. This one's called Tom Violence. So with that clip out of the way, now you know what we've been dealing with here, and we are going to introduce our panel of complainers this week, as we like to do here, with a particularly snarky, particularly mean tweet-length review of the album, and I am going to throw it first over to Marty.
If I worked for People magazine, this is what I would have written about the album. If Not Trying was the standard of 1980s New York hipster excellency, then this album is a real standout. For me, the highlight of Evol by Sonic Youth is that I think, though I'm not 100% sure, that the guitar and bass are in tune.
Depends on what tuning means, Marty. We're going to get into that, man.
It's all relative.
We're going to get into that. And listen, we have a very special guest with us tonight. I'm sure he's all revved up and ready to yell at us for our dumb opinions about this album. He's going to get a proper introduction after this. But first, Discography, Dave Gebro, I want to hear your tweet-length review.
Okay, first of all, I'm already pissed off at what I've heard here. I will be flying the flag of reverence here, but Evol, the product of Sonic Youth's emergence from their gothic subterranean underground, marked their initial dalliance with a trashy pop culture aesthetic that only right around the corner would hit on a dizzying jackpot of ideas that coalesced around S&M, the Beach Boys, R. Kearns art porn, beat poetry, Philip K. Dick science fiction, Madonna paparazzi shots, Metal Machine music, and weed-induced memory loss.
Jesus. No, we're in for it tonight, audience. We're in for it. Okay, let's keep this train rolling and go on to Phil.
That's a tough act to follow. Tough one. But here's what I got. On 1986's Evol, Sonic Youth strips rock down to its skeleton to see if it still twitches. Super punk. Not because it's fast or loud, but because it has zero interest in entertaining you. And to that end, not entertaining me, Sonic Youth succeeds.
Damn. I have a tweet like the review as well. This is Rob here, and mine goes like this. Pretentious assholes set out to deconstruct rock and roll, but end up sounding more like goats fighting in a thunderstorm. The recursive loop of self-satisfaction here is hard to take, even for me. And I'm not even sure I'm talking about the album or my own podcast. Okay, let's give our guest, Discography Dave, a proper introduction. He's the hardest working man in podcasting, doing all the deep dives that you didn't even know you needed in your life. Thank you. Welcome back to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's always good to be here. Although I'm really like trying to act playfully incensed right now.
I think last time we hung out with Dave, he was doing like a 127 episode on all the great grandchildren of the living members of the Beatles. Is that correct?
That's right. Well, actually, I'm in the midst of, this is no joke, I'm in the midst of a series I'm doing a Beach Boys series, but right now it's just on Pet Sounds, and I'm in the midst of 49 episodes on one album.
Jesus.
But I'm in the midst of a series with Graham Nash, a sprawling series about his entire career. And I'm about to set off on a Jefferson Airplane series with Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy.
So you're in your spare time, somehow you find time to not only book Graham Nash, but then interview him for hours and hours at a time, Dave.
Yeah, and I'm about to do a Billy Joel series as well.
Nice. And, you mentioned in your tweet Metal Machine Music, which is a heck of a touchstone for this record here and can help segue us into general impressions. But for those who might not know, you also embarked on a project inspired by Metal Machine Music recently. Is that right, Dave?
It is. I've had the idea for many years, but then when the podcast came, it was the perfect time to implement it. At the end of every interview, I would ask if they would be interested in doing an ambient reworking of one side of Metal Machine Music, which is, depending on what you believe, either Lou Reed's brilliant scheme at getting out of a record contract or a serious electronic symphony of feedback, or both. And I got Unrest's Mark Robinson, Olivia Tremor Control's Will Cullen Hart, Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr., and Juan's Corey Hansen to each cover a 16-minute 1-second side.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you listen, our audience isn't quite as cool as yours, Dave. So for those who might not know, Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed is literally just him turning all the amplifiers up to 10 and leaving the guitars sitting next to the amps for, I don't know, an hour or more. I'm not sure how long that thing runs.
And actually, the first snatch of it that I ever heard was on the Sonic Youth's record before Evol, Bad Moon Rising. They actually sample a clip from it and on one of the songs. And, to sample that is so cool, especially in 1985. And I have to say, as a high school student, I was still am a massive Sonic Youth fan. But Sonic Youth in the 80s, to me, they kind of owned the 80s. Once it gets to 1990, they become a different band. But to me, everything leading up to and including Daydream Nation, there's almost nothing as good musically as, it was a very exciting time, I think, for that band.
Says the guy who felt the world needed a reworking of Metal Machine Music. Hard to believe, but it did seem relevant. I do want to hear from Phil and Marty. Let's start with you, Marty. How did your week go?
Yeah. So I feel like there used to be nothing I liked about Sonic Youth, and now there are things I like about Sonic Youth. I don't think I was ready for them when I first tried to pick them up, maybe in late high school, early college. I don't think I had listened to enough music to understand experimental music. And now I've listened to so much music that I long for weird shit. And so this kind of hit for me in many ways. If I had to pick, I would say I like Thurston Moore's vocal styling and delivery more than Kim Gordon. So I kind of tend to gravitate towards the songs that he leads on. And the other thing I like about this album is the addition of Steve Shelley on drums. I think he's really a crisp, clean drummer, and he keeps them grounded throughout the album, which I went back and listened to some of their older stuff, and it's a real kind of market change in their sound.
And marketable.
Yeah.
He does help their transition into them being a pop band.
Yeah, this is considered their departure from being pure noise rave-ups to being a quote-unquote pop band. Although it's still pretty weird by almost anyone's standard, and they still have a number of transitions to go to get to something approaching hits, which they never really had. Phil, what did you think?
Yeah, so I mean, sort of jumping off from where Marty ended, I thought I knew more about Sonic Youth than this week taught me. I heard Goo, I'm familiar with Goo, I'm familiar with Daydream Nation, but it became pretty apparent pretty quickly. I knew a lot less about Sonic Youth than I realized. I recognized their voices. I recognized, the sort of pre-Nirvana, grunge-ish feedback. But I was definitely shocked at how feedbacky and experimental and out jazz this week's record was.
I would have to agree. I felt the same way as pretty much what you just said, Phil. I was familiar with Daydream Nation, maybe a bit of Dirty. Maybe I'd heard Goo before, one of the other ones. And I don't believe I'd ever heard anything off of this record before this week. And I was assuming it would be a little more straight down the line, fuzzy indie rock. And what I got was much cooler than what I thought I was going to get in terms of textures, in terms of weirdness, guitar noise, this dark, atmospheric, cinematic quality. That was just not what I was personally expecting. It's got that David Lynch movie vibe. So there was a lot to like here for me. The audience, I think, our standard audience knows that we start with an extra snarky approach, then we kind of roll those opinions back a little bit. That said, I still think there is much to complain about here, including oftentimes the vocal treatment and some of the times when it just does not feel like they pulled themselves together into a song that went anywhere. There's some high highs for sure, and they are very good at creating atmosphere and being ominous and unsettling in a way that not a lot of music is. Those are real feelings that this music inspired in me, and that itself is impressive these 40 years on. But I will be pushing back on some of the vocal approach stuff, which feels tossed off or downright lazy, and at least a couple of the songs, including the low point on our focus list, where I just don't feel like they ever got anything going.
Wait, there's just one low point on our focus list.
Wait, okay, do you mind if I guess what song you think that is? Because I'm pretty sure I know which one.
You know what? We'll get there when we get to the songs.
Okay.
We'll get there when we get to the songs. But let me clarify that no, actually, in this case, I felt compelled to put 2 songs I would say I do not like and 3 songs I do like on the focus list. We can discuss why when we get to them. But I do think this is an interesting story nonetheless. And of course, as with every week, reading about this band, not only listening to the music intensely, but also hearing this backstory, which we're going to tell, it made it more compelling, for sure. Seeing where they came from, seeing that this is a very transitional record for them, as we alluded to, it feels like, as per the story, it's in this sweet spot where the band is still broke and extremely weird, and really not even sure they're going to be a band much longer because this does not seem to be working. But they're also pretty confident relative because they've been a band for a while and they have dialed in a level of craft, including, I think, the band. The noise the band is making, very generally speaking, the drums, the guitars, I'll even say the bass, is fairly unimpugnable. My main complaint is going to be that I wish they did more instrumental music.
No, I hear that. I'm curious also to learn about this band. I just assumed that they were just kind of like scenesters in New York, and their draw was their performance. That's just my guess, not knowing much about them. And I think maybe part of what my issue is that maybe sometimes music like this doesn't come across in the same way. Like, I could see myself going to see them live around this time, watching them perform this album, and walking out being like, that is the best concert I've ever been to in my entire life. That might maybe as like a overweight 45-year-old listening to while like doing my corporate job doesn't really come across in the same way.
Doesn't land quite the same.
I saw them in the late 80s and the early 90s a bunch of times, and they were absolutely phenomenal. Some of the best music I've ever heard, including a spot opening up for Neil Young in 91, where they did Expressway to Your Skull, also known as Madonna, Sean and Me on this record, which is an epic. And, the way that I was hit at that time, because I don't feel like from Dirty on, I don't really feel like they're an important band anymore. I feel like they were an important band that hung around a lot and were sort of grandfathering in a lot of the grunge stuff. But to me, this is not grunge music. This is art-damaged scenester music from the 80s. And in fact, the cover shot is a performance artist named Lung Leg. And she was in a bunch of films of a guy named R. Kern. He was a director from the scene in New York, making a bunch of really weird movies, one of which is called Fingered, starring Lydia Lunch, who co-wrote one of the songs on this record. And in that film, she gets raped with a gun. There's all kinds of and it's a comedy. It is an it's actually funny and it's disturbing but Sonic Youth were just part of this scene. They weren't lording over it. It was all like this creative cesspool that was coming out of that late 70s really dirty, filthy New York scene.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's in a way it's a nice continuation of some of the other bands we have talked about. The so-called art rock scene of New York, dating back to the Velvet Underground, being associated with Warhol's Factory, and this trying to meld high art with low art being popular music on through, or I think related to what we recently talked about with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, kind of carried through to the CBGB's days of television and the explosion of punk when it was a very all-inclusive thing. And in some ways, I do think Sonic Youth is the bookend on that story of how art melds with music in the New York scene.
Television especially. So Tom Violence is actually about Tom Verlaine.
Oh, wow.
That's shorthand for Tom Verlaine.
Awesome. I did not know that, so yeah. I'm excited to get farther into that. I also wanted to mention, too, because I didn't know where to put this exactly in the story. We're going to tell the backstory of Sonic Youth, how they got together, and up to the creation of this album. But as we've been talking about, they went on for a while longer. And I wanted to mention that one of the things they do on this album is they all get songwriting credit on all the tracks. And I'm always, now, especially as a middle-aged person, I'm impressed by young people who know enough to do that. It's like they had read their history. They knew that that was the kind of thing that broke up bands in the past. And it's one of the reasons they were able to stick around and make, I think, several more great records in many people's opinions, but even stick around for a couple decades more in terms of touring.
Well, because some people weren't getting rich while other people were basically just like living off the road money.
That's correct. That is a common problem with many band stories, way more often than not, where the songwriter is making a lot of money through publishing checks and songwriter royalties, and let's say the drummer in the band is only getting a small salary based on the touring, and that disparity is what creates a lot of resentment in a band.
Like Talking Heads, I'm thinking.
I'm sure.
Offhand.
Like Talking Heads. Yeah. Yes. In fact, I think Chris France is still mad about that.
Just like Talking Heads, also, there's that added stress of a relationship within that relationship of the band. Plus, there's the new guy, Steve Shelley. There was like all different cross lines of potential stress that were hitting on that band.
Absolutely. So, I think that is a great segue to start getting into the background of this record of Sonic Youth, the band. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. And we are back. So, getting into the background of Sonic Youth tonight, we're kicking off the story of Sonic Youth with the story of Thurston Moore. Thurston is born in 1958. He spends his childhood moving between Florida and Connecticut, eventually growing up mostly in Connecticut. His father, turns out, is a professor of music, but the music being played in Thurston's house growing up is mostly classical music. Now, interestingly enough, Thurston's father, Thurston Sr., mysteriously disappeared after signing up for what was intended to be a 3-hour tour on a cruise liner. Now, the weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. And they eventually landed on an uncharted isle and made a radio out of coconuts when hilarity ensued. I understand that's a very topical reference, but seriously, is there a more rich guy name than Thurston?
Oh, right. Yeah. Thurston Howell is the guy on Gilligan's Island, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
I know. I'm keeping it topical for the kids, Marty. For the kids.
Right.
So Thurston's lightning bolt moment comes one day when he hears Louie Louie by the Kingsmen on the radio, and he instantly knows he wants to be in a band. He embraces rock and roll, breaking with his classical roots. And by embracing it, I mean he starts borrowing his older brother's Stratocaster and making lots of noise. I literally mean making noise.
So that reminds you kind of how old he is, which kind of struck me in a way that I just wasn't prepared for. It's like Louie Louie is like, that's an old song. Like he's not a...
My father was born in 1958. Thurston Moore's the same age as my dad. Which is, I can't imagine my dad being in Sonic Youth.
That shows how this band and he and Kim Gordon, all of them, maintained a level of hipness through the 90s that made you think they were still under 30.
Totally.
How experimental is your dad?
Not experimental enough to be making this weird music in the late 80s.
But by all accounts, he was instantly fascinated by making weird sounds, by banging on this guitar, not particularly interested in learning it with any particular technique. And I just like to imagine that you're his parents hearing him smacking around an electric guitar, not even pretending to learn how to play it. And you'd be thinking, this is not a career path.
Yeah, your dad's a professor of music. He's like crying at the dinner table.
And yet life is funny sometimes because it worked out. So by this point, he gets a little older. It's the 70s. Prog rock is very popular. Young Thurston, after a brief fascination and an early experience at a Rick Wakeman concert, grows to hate the pomp and circumstance of bands like Yes. And his dream as a teenager instead is to be, of course, Iggy Pop, the anti-technique, energy, and attitude are everything approach. So at this point, he's in Connecticut. He spends a short year in a Connecticut college, but even during that time, he's constantly traveling over to Manhattan, to New York City to see shows, right? And this is the late 70s. And after a year, he just quits and moves to Manhattan. This is now 1978. As we know from other episodes, this is when New York is perhaps at its most happening. He immerses himself in the scene. He's hanging out at Max's Kansas City at CBGB's. He's seen a bunch of bands. Now, sad as it may be, punk was pretty much over and done with mere seconds after it started. So what Thurston sees when he gets there, he doesn't particularly like either, especially as he said, punk music became very quickly about aesthetics and conformity. A lot of fashion, a lot of outright copycats, whereas in his mind, the concept of it, it's supposed to be about reinvention. And I have to admit, he's got a solid point there. So Thurston forms a band called Room Tone, which is soon after renamed The Coachmen. Now, I heard different versions of this story, actually. In a more recent interview with Mark Maron, Thurston said that the rest of the Coachmen were like the class after talking heads at the Rhode Island School of Design who were eager to move to the big city and follow in their old classmates' footsteps, and that they just bumped into Thurston at a record store one day and he joined the band. I heard other stuff that said he formed the band, or it was his band, but in any case, he's in a band. And I do think this guy has a way with words. They do sound a little like intellectuals, but I mean that in a positive sense. They have thought a lot about what this time and place meant that birthed them. So he calls New York a sonic democracy, a melting pot where styles collided and fused and transformed overnight. So it was an exciting time. And again, we're dealing with the same scene that Television, who we recently covered, is a part of, and going further back to bands like VU, where the art world of New York is actively trying to dabble and blend with the world of pop music, right? High meets low. So that thread is ultimately continuing here.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine like Jonathan Richman and Sonic Youth running into each other, kind of both happening at the same time,
Yeah, they are technically a little bit a part of different scenes, right? So the Coachmen, they gig around town for maybe a year or so. They play CBGBs, they play Max's, and according to Thurston, guys like David Byrne would show up at the gigs because he was friendly with the other dudes in the band. But in spite of that artistic vote of confidence, the band dissolves relatively quickly. However, one really amazing thing comes from it. At one of the very last Coachman gigs, a woman named Kim Gordon shows up. She and Thurston meet and hit it off right away, and they start dating and start rehearsing together as a band that would become Sonic Youth. So let's take this moment to flashback and talk about Kim Gordon's background. She's born in 1953 in New York, but she mostly grows up in LA. So the first interesting thing is that she's 5 years older than Thurston, which, it's not a big deal after you're 30, but when it means something when you're 21 or 22. So I was slightly surprised. Kim moved around a lot when she was a kid because her father was a professor as well. She spent time in Hawaii, she spent time in Hong Kong, and as part of that, she listened to a lot of different music. So she was the one that was more well-versed in Joni Mitchell and free jazz like Ornette Coleman. But she does eventually land in LA and go to high school there, where I read that she dated Danny Elfman of Oingo Boingo.
Okay, damn.
That's a weird high school connection, just period.
Indeed.
Almost makes sense that they would have dated, once those two stars collide.
Yeah, and in case I referenced these other bands that she listened to, like Ornette Coleman, free jazz. There's clearly some kind of connection between that and what Sonic Youth are doing, but also someone like Joni Mitchell with the alternate tunings, getting pretty out there with soundscapes. Clearly, that's some of the influence. So for college, she goes to art school in LA, and then after she graduates, she moves to New York to start what she thinks of as her art career. This is in 1980. At this point in her life, age 27, she has never played any instrument at all. But who cares about that? This is punk, baby. Now let's go back to the New York scene at that time, because the environment here, I think, is important to how the band formed and what inspired Kim to get into music and everything else that's coming up, right? So punk music, again, in the view of the cool kids like Thurston and Kim, it started as an all-inclusive artistic movement, but it quickly has become, to their minds, recycling old rock and roll cliches with just different haircuts. The music business chewed it up and spit it out quite quickly. And as the 70s turn over into the 80s, they're seeing what they perceive as the previously edgy and underground bands like Talking Heads and Blondie, totally getting processed by the industry and becoming mainstream as a new pop genre called new wave. So they don't like that. What emerges is a gritty reaction genre called no wave. This is an artsy anti-movement. I heard it called a sledgehammer sharpened for the destruction of rock and a middle finger to the sellouts of punk. That's the ethos at work here. I also heard a quote that described no wave as the musicianship of the non-musician. The idea that you put an instrument in an interesting person's hands and that they will do something interesting with it.
Do you know about the flagship album of No Wave?
Are you going to talk about the Brian Eno comp?
Go ahead, please. I assumed you were on it.
Yes. We're going to get to that momentarily. But I do think just, right off the bat, through this podcast, I think have indicated that I like a heavy dose of artsiness mixed in with my rock. I love the Velvet Underground. I was the one defending them, and even Frank Zappa and other things of that nature. I do understand where a genre like this is coming from. That said, I'm going to be poking fun at it. So I wanted to mention, too, that another throwback to another episode we did, I want to say in the first 20 episodes we ever did, but the band Swans is an early and important part of the no wave movement. Recall, I'm going to connect it to one of our episodes, Swans frontman Michael Gira eventually discovers Devendra Banhart and signs him to Young God Records. That's 15 years later, but we ended up talking about Swans on the Devendra Banhart episode. So clearly this new genre, no wave, is avant-garde. It's about experimenting with atonality, noise, all kinds of fringe ideas in music. And I do find it hilarious how quickly genres arise and response genres cycle, because as I was first reading about this, I was like, okay, early 80s makes sense. It's a response to Flock of Seagulls and the like. But no, the most significant document of the no wave scene that Dave just alluded to is a compilation produced by Brian Eno that came out in 1978 called No New York. Just think about that for a second. The Ramones' first album, Sex Pistols' first album, came out in 1976. But by 1978, there's already a swath of established and recorded bands going against that, a post-genre. How does it happen so fast?
I wonder what a copy of that record's worth these days. Probably a considerable amount of money. if you could even find one.
Seriously.
I mean, the genre really was, I think, kind of based on the idea of planned obsolescence. It was here and gone so quickly. It's like when the record came out, it was kind of done.
All the coolness is gone.
All the coolness is gone. Yeah, exactly. So by the time Sonic Youth form in 1981, they're heavily inspired by no wave, but they might be a little late to the genre, to your point, Dave, because I've also heard them called post-no wave, which, again, these genre tags are ridiculous. The other genre tag I came across here in my research, arising from the ashes of the no wave scene, is called avant funk, and it's also known as mutant disco, which they were both too amazing to not shoehorn into this episode.
The best band from that little enclave is called ESG. I mean, they're just incredible.
And look, if you're yelling at your speakers right now because I'm not properly bowing in deference to the cultural and artistic importance of no wave or mutant funk or avant funk, or whatever, fuck you and your cheap guitar that you banged out an E11 chord on. I'm just saying genre tags are ridiculous by design, so relax. All right, so it's out of this muck and mire that the band Sonic Youth is officially formed. The original name they played around with was male bonding, which apparently at that time was a new buzzword on the scene. But they didn't land on that. They briefly changed it to Red Milk, which I kind of like as a name. Then to the Arcadians, and they finally landed on Sonic Youth, playing their first gig in 1981.
All of those are better than male bonding. That just wouldn't have aged as well. Really, they picked the right name.
Yeah, Sonic Youth is a great name.
Sonic Youth, one of the greatest band names of all time.
Absolutely.
It really is. It's a terrific name. No one could take that away from them. So it came about as a combination of Fred Sonic Smith from the MC5, member of the MC5, and a reggae artist they liked called Big Youth. And Kim Gordon is quoted as saying that as soon as they locked in the name, they locked in what they wanted to be as a band. It was one of those moments.
They took the right words, because if they called themselves Big Fred, they would have taken the wrong words.
Indeed. So now Kim Gordon, as we said previously, plays no instruments, but she still wants to make loud and raucous music. So she heads to a conservatory for the next few years to really buckle down and study music theory. Just kidding. She picks up a bass and is ready to go instantly.
Should we tell the bass joke again?
Yeah, tell it, please.
All right, so the bass joke goes like this. Dad takes his son to a bass lesson, and at the first lesson, the teacher teaches him all the notes on the lowest string. And father asks his son, "What'd you learn today, son?" And he says, "Well, all the notes on the lowest string." So he takes him to the second lesson, and the teacher teaches the bass player all the notes on the second lowest string. He says, father asks his son, "What'd you learn today?" And he said, "I learned all the notes on the second lowest string." So the third week comes, and dad's like, "Hey, you want me to take you to your bass lesson?" He's like, "No way, man. I got a gig."
Yeah, that's about all you need. So
I tell that every time the bass players aren't on.
Yeah, that's good.
So Thurston, who is nothing if not ambitious, I should say, he takes the step to launch a festival called Noise Fest in the summer of 1981. He invites all the other no-wave and post-no-wave noise bands to play, and of course Sonic Youth plays the festival too. The idea behind Noise Fest was to showcase all these avant-garde noise bands that weren't getting a lot of gigs otherwise. Blowing your mind, right? That it's a little hard to get a gig when all you're doing is just putting feedback through the speakers.
I do find that a little surprising that it wasn't more popularly received.
And I said it's ambitious because it is a 9-day festival.
Fuck. Where did this happen?
It was at an art gallery.
That makes a little more sense.
Yeah, and I assume some of the bands played multiple times and things like that. But this is where they meet the third pillar of the Sonic Youth story and sound. His name is Lee Ronaldo. Lee is playing in something called Glenn Branca's Guitar Orchestra, which is kind of what it sounds like.
Can't wait to research that.
10 plus guitar players playing 6-string guitars where all the strings are tuned to the same note and they're just making a buttload of noise and feedback. And I guess the idea was stacking instruments like that. So if 10 different guitars all have 6 strings tuned to the same note, but each guitar is tuned to a different note, you get a crazy electric chord ringing out.
That makes sense.
Yeah, sort of, yes. Sort of. I'm picturing the moment at the beginning of Back to the Future where Marty plugs into Doc's speaker and just hits one chord and gets blown through the wall.
Yeah,
But anyway, the Glenn Branca's Guitar Orchestra is a great example of creativity that I can respect, but absolutely do not want to hear. So Thurston actually had played with this orchestra briefly, but it was this festival where he was really blown away by the group, and in particular by Lee. He called them the most ferocious guitar band he had ever seen. He connects with Lee Ranaldo, and he invites him to join Sonic Youth right away. And before we move away from Glenn Branca, I have to say that Glenn Branca, it sounds like, was a huge influence on this whole scene and on Sonic Youth in particular. He was making his own instruments. He was using prepared instruments, which is, as I think we've mentioned before, it's like when you adjust a regular instrument's sound quite a bit by adding something to it, like putting a bunch of stuff on the piano strings inside the box, or putting clothespins on the strings of your guitar and hitting it with a drumstick or something like that. All the stuff that Sonic Youth would continue to experiment with through the 80s and beyond. I also found this quote that said, Branca used volume as a compositional element, which just made me laugh. But okay, don't all guitar players. So Lee Ranaldo was a Long Island kid. He was actually more into the Grateful Dead and psych rock than either Kim or Thurston. So you're getting this nice mix of backgrounds when this band is really forming up. And he's also 2 years older than Thurston. So again, Thurston Moore's the youngest person in this band by a couple years. Lee Ranaldo is often cited as a founding member of Sonic Youth. But the story I just told, and which doesn't seem like it's disputed anywhere, indicates that he joined very early, but it was after they landed on a name and maybe even after they played a few gigs. I think the point of it is that he's seen as completely essential to the sound the band ultimately created and to what they became. So in that sense, he is a founding member. So now that the core of the band has solidified, it is time for everyone's favorite segment. It is Sonic Youth by the numbers.
All right.
Number 5. That is the number of albums that Sonic Youth has on the 1001 list. I have to believe that even hardcore fans of this band would agree that might be overkill. And what's more, it's a run of albums, starting with Evol, tonight's album, and extending through 1992's Dirty, without any skips, unless you count the side project they released under a different band name that now lives under Sonic Youth on digital streaming platforms. 5 albums.
I believe it should be shifted back. I think Bad Moon Rising, which came before this, is a crucial album. It's an absolutely crucial concept album. I think by the time they got to Goo, they were starting to lose that, really top tier element of greatness. And then Dirty, to me, is a very inessential record.
Interesting. Next number up, we have 50. As in one anecdote, the number of guitars that Thurston and Lee supposedly brought to some of their later gigs. Now, this is, of course, farther along in their career. They had a bit more clout and I presume some roadies, but they got to a point where every song had a wildly different alternate tuning and required strange electrical or mechanical preparation of a guitar. Let me just say that I am a guitar player. I've briefly considered bringing 2 guitars to a gig and then nixed it as pretentious. So that is pure insanity.
Sometimes I would bring a second guitar to the gig, but it would just be a backup in case I broke a string.
Right.
Only once in my life have I actually cycled guitars at a show, and it was because of alternate tuning.
And you must have felt embarrassed. Slightly.
I did. Yeah, I felt immense pressure between the time I unplugged one guitar and plugged the other one in. God forbid it wasn't already in tune. Fuck. I can feel it right now.
The next number I want to tell you about is number 31. In Pitchfork's top records of the 1980s, this album comes in 31st. And oh, guess what? 2 of their subsequent albums rank higher up, including the number 1 album of the 1980s slot being taken by Daydream Nation. You could not hope to find a band more worshipped by music critic hipster jerk-offs. Now listen, I just want to say that using the same logic that many use to malign our beloved Fish, which is that their fans are fucking ridiculous, one could argue that this band is not worth listening to just for that reason. It's not my argument. I'm just saying it's out there. Next number I want to throw out to you is number 1. Spin Magazine, in a staff-voted poll, named Thurston Moore and Lee Ranaldo as the number 1 guitarist of all time.
That seems a little Seems like a little much to me.
Of all time.
Not Django, not any of those Andres Segovia motherfuckers.
That's amazing. It is a little much. I mean, I like the sonic architecture of their records, but I would not say he's the greatest guitarist of all time.
And they were listed jointly as a one guitar player.
Right.
Which I suppose was part of the fun that they were having there. Rolling Stone, in a previous poll, called Thurston Moore number 33 of the best guitar players of all time. I think these accolades are, by any objective measure, a bit much. It doesn't mean that the music is not interesting, cool, experimental, and edgy, but you can understand why there is a little bit of a turnoff factor right off the gate with this much jerking off of this band. And the last number I want to throw out to you is 13, as in, I have estimated that to produce this show you're listening to every week, we spend about 13 minutes of production time for every minute of the show you hear for free every Monday. That includes the research, the listening, the audio mastering we do in post, getting everything posted. We work hard week after week, and we absolutely love that you're listening and enjoying it. And guess what? We need your support. Review us on Spotify, join our mailing list, go jump in the comments on Patreon about this very album right now and tell us what you think. All those things are 100% free for you to do. It makes us feel good, however briefly, about our life choices here. So thank you. Back to our story. We now have our trio of Thurston Moore, Kim Gordon, and Lee Ronaldo. And we're back to the story of Sonic Youth. Now, at this point, they had been switching off who would play drums on stage, but they realized they need a real drummer. So they recruit a guy called Richard Edson, who records an EP with them later that same year for Glenn Branca's new label, which is called Neutral. When that does nothing, the drummer decides to leave the band, initially to focus more on his other band, and later to pursue an acting career. And I recognized his face immediately as the car mechanic in Ferris Bueller who takes Cameron's stolen Ferrari for a joyride. But in any case, they make a full record after that. You remember that guy? He's kind of got a memorable face.
I definitely remember that scene. Yeah,
I mean, you can never forget the shot from under the car as it comes. Yeah.
Right.
Goes over the hill or he jumps it. Yeah.
He looks kind of like Mario the plumber, a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So they make a full record after that called Confusion is Sex, and they're using power drills fed through a wah-wah pedal as instruments and all kinds of crazy stuff. Thurston Moore is quoted as saying at this time, "I wanted to play high-energy music and I wanted to destroy." Now, the other thing we should say that was inspiring them around this time, the other movement that was happening was hardcore punk music. The energy, the kill 'em all attitude. They sensed that style wasn't for them, but they liked and respected it quite a bit. They were much more comfortable, though, in this art world, weird New York scene, and that is where they stayed for a while. But as we alluded to, they were experimenting a lot with alternate guitar tunings, which leads to lots of retuning of guitars between songs. Because these are the days, keep in mind, before muted tuning pedals. So the audience is just sitting there listening to them tune up after every single song.
Fuck. By ear.
By ear, exactly. Yes. And I read anecdotes that said that sometimes they would come out before the show and they would tune up 12 plus guitars individually out loud. And then after 10 minutes of that, walk off the stage again. Like, can you imagine?
Holy shit.
They dealt with some heckling.
It's kind of fun. I kind of like that. It's like it's like the opener. It's just cacophonous guitar tuning.
They definitely do not give a fuck if you like them or not, and that is something to be respected, certainly. But along the way, right, the band is struggling to get traction in the US. They're having a slightly easier time in Europe, and they tour there a few times with a little bit of success. Kim and Thurston get married in 1984, and somewhere around this time, they kick off a feud with a certain music critic named Robert Christgau of The Village Voice, who initially gave them...
This is your boy. You love Christgau.
It's our boy. Robert Christgau initially gave them bad reviews. He later changed his tune. Now, perhaps what convinced him was that Sonic Youth wrote a song called I Killed Christgau with My Big Fucking Dick.
That's a threat. Sounds like a threat.
Their shows at the time sound completely unhinged. Thurston said Lee would just run into the crowd playing his guitar with other people's teeth. Just take a moment with that. And by their own admission, they are not particularly good, but the British press love them because, as we all know, musically, the UK can do absolutely no wrong. And what do you know? They come back to America. They come back to New York. There's a line around the block for them at CBGB's. Now, even so, they cannot sell any records. No significant records being sold, and the buzz dissipates over time. It's now 1985. They are no longer New York media darlings even. They don't have any U.S. fans, and they certainly are not getting any airplay. All that, plus they don't really trust the label they're on, Glenn Branca's label. They don't think they're being straight with them, so instead they take their next record to a small label called Homestead, pretty much solely because the guy they meet and become friends with works there, and his name is Gerald Kozloy. We're going to get to him in a second. This album, preceding ours tonight, is called Bad Moon Rising. Dave mentioned that he thinks it's an essential album, and it's intended as a little bit of a skewering of the rise of Americana music, which was happening around that time. Things like Springsteen, Tom Petty, even John Mellencamp. And, of course, the title references a CCR song. Although I did hear that Thurston Moore say that John Fogerty was awesome, at least once, like the real spirit of rock and roll. Now, that one comes out. The press calls it artsy and pretentious. So we are at a low point in Sonic Youth's history here. During the day, they have day jobs. They're painting houses. They've made 2 full albums and an EP for 2 different labels, and they've already been up and down the roller coaster of press interest. This music thing does not seem to be working out for the group. This is the context coming into the Evol sessions. But here's the good news. They're making some good connections. While on their very first West Coast tour, they meet a local DJ in Seattle called Bruce Pavitt, who pays them $100 to license a song for his upcoming compilation called Sub Pop 100. He would later found Sub Pop Records and become a major player in the indie scene for years to come.
What was that compilation about? Do you have any background on that?
Apparently, Bruce Pavitt is a local DJ, like I said, and he wanted to start a record label via compilations and simply promote local scenes. And he decided to start with his own local scene. And so he just called it Sub Pop. That was just the name he came up with for the compilation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It blew up. It led to Sub Pop Records and him focusing on Seattle for quite a while. And they've released many other records that I think we've covered here. Certainly the Fleet Foxes record was a Sub Pop record. They're a big player all through the 90s and into the 2000s. It seems at this point that Sonic Youth have realized that the hip, young thing energy has already passed them by. So they lean into networking across bands, helping younger bands with booking shows, stuff like that. And some say that at this time they were very purposely and strategically eyeing up a spot on the roster of their favorite label at the time, SST Records, home to Black Flag and the Meat Puppets. But apparently the problem was that one of the leads at SST really did not like Sonic Youth. Supposedly, he was quoted as saying, "Record collectors shouldn't be in bands."
Ooh.
Boosh.
Yeah.
But it's also true that younger bands do look up to them. And this has helped along. I mean, they're a little bit older. They're not super old yet. They're still in their 20s. But this has helped along partially by the fact that at the core of this band, you have a married couple. So it sounds like other people, other bands, saw them as inherently more stable, more like a family. Ultimately, their ploy works. Founder of SST, Greg Ginn, who's also in the band Black Flag, calls them up one day and agrees to release their next album. Now, in indie terms, this is now the big leagues. And it's possibly apocryphal, but I heard that literally that call from Greg Ginn to Sonic Youth got made within minutes of the guy who didn't like Sonic Youth leaving the label. Interestingly, this is all happening. It's this really interesting time in indie music. So Homestead Records, the one they were on for the record before, and their buddy Gerald Kozloy get the shaft. And Gerald takes it hard because they're such great friends. But no worries, he soon rebounds and starts yet another record label. This one is called Matador, which also becomes a major indie player stretching out for decades to come.
Good time for record labels.
Good time to found a record label, right? I mean, those guys would go on to put in like 15 to 20 years of probably pretty hard work after that making.
And then a big band for Matador was Pavement, and Steve Malkmus from Pavement was massively inspired by Evol.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I actually was wondering aloud to myself if this was the origin of the slacker vocal tick, which I think of as strongly associated with Pavement and other 90s bands.
I definitely think that There are definitely a lot of elements of this record when you place it like contextually that you can see that this massively influenced the early 90s sort of. I'm going to call it the grunge scene, but it's much bigger than that, right? That early 90s sort of anti-hair metal pop.
I'm going to quote Steve Malkmus. He said, "After I discovered Evol, I started to retune my guitar like Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo. I didn't want to continue playing with preset tunings. Suddenly that seemed very boring, and that's how it stayed until today."
Yeah, I totally buy that. It was just a really fertile time. And going back to the indie record label thing, keep in mind that the challenge, even for indie bands, like in Sonic Youth's mind, they were like, well, we're going to keep selling a few more records every record. And if we do have a breakout record, we need a label that can handle that. So the challenge, I believe we've even heard about it, the challenge of a lot of these small record labels is that when they do have a success on their hands, meeting demand for that becomes very, very challenging and sometimes nearly bankrupts them. But okay, they get the record contract with SST. That's their dream at the time. They're label mates with Black Flag, who they very much respect. But it's a little too late for their drummer, a guy called Bert. So this is now at least the second drummer in Sonic Youth. He had resigned months before, and they recruited a guy called Steve Shelley, formerly of a band called the Crucifix. And I guess they had known this guy around New York for a while. He was even house sitting for Thurston and Kim while they were on tour in Europe. The drummer quits after the European tour. They come home to meet the house sitter, and they say, why don't you join the band? So now here we are with the band for Evol compiled. Steve Shelley is now the youngest member of the band. He's like 21 at this point. And it seems like by all accounts, he really helped the band's sound evolve right away, right? But perhaps his most important feature as a musician, he owns a van.
PA system is also acceptable.
So with a new record contract in hand, they rehearse intensely and head into the studio to make Evol, which I'm speculating a little bit here, see as a last shot at getting the band to break through. There's no excuses now. They've spent years honing their live show, their chaotic noise sound overall, and their lineup, and now they have a label that can take them to the next level. There are really no excuses left here, right? They record this at a place called BC Studio in Brooklyn with Martin Bisi, a guy who'd already worked with bands like Swans and has worked with John Zorn, so he kind of understood the loud and unsettling aesthetic as a production style.
Zorny, working with old Zorn.
Right.
Huh?
You know Zorn, don't you, Phil?
Yeah, I know all about Zorn.
Speaking of which, you know who mastered this record is a guy called John Golden. Phil, does that name ring a bell with you?
Is he still mastering records? Is he just like mastering everything to this day?
He mastered the Chop record.
What?
Yeah, now it could have been one of his lackeys or whatever, but yeah,
Wow.
He still runs a mastering studio, and he mastered this record. So the sessions were not big budget affairs, but it does sound like they had enough time to experiment, which is clearly what they want to do, with a lot of different textures and tunings and whacking on stuff. The name of the album is after a piece by a video artist named Knox Harrington. Just kidding. It's Tony Orsel, who's still a guy.
My brother worked for Tony for I think almost 10 years.
No kidding.
As his yeah. My brother produced all of his videos for.
I was gonna say I'm not in this world, so I did not know anything about this guy, but he's still a guy. He's a major guy who's doing installations, according to Google, and living an artistic life, which is awesome. What did your brother help him with, Marty?
He made all his videos.
That's awesome.
He had maybe 2 or 3 people that worked directly under him. He would have and I might be a little bit wrong here, but from what I understand, he would have a concept, and my brother and the other people that worked under him would help him execute it. And they would travel around the world at galleries and set up his shows. And I think my brother worked for 10 years. Yeah,
that's awesome. Of course, the name is also a reference to evolution, and I'm ashamed to say it took me most of the week to even notice this. It is love spelled backwards.
Just figured that out now, Rob.
Yeah, you too? I really had to stare at it for a while. Mike Watt from the Minutemen came in and played bass on a couple of the songs. You might remember from our episode, number 129, that Mike Watt of the Minutemen, another SST band, had just faced severe tragedy when his bandmate and best friend D. Boone died in a car crash. So Mike is deeply depressed. He's considering quitting music, and Thurston encourages him not to do that. And part of it was coming into the studio with Sonic Youth for this album. Now, weirdly, he plays on the one song about a terrible car crash, which is some kind of punk catharsis, I guess.
This was a crucial experience for him to get back into music. He actually calls not only playing on this record, but then subsequently touring with Sonic Youth and starting Firehose as the key event that allowed him back into music. I talked with him actually about it. I did a series of Mike Watt rating the Minutemen records on Discograffiti, and this was a turning point for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. I almost forgot that you had interviewed him, Dave. And I have to say the Minutemen record wasn't exactly for me, but I did vote for it to be essential. And I do always remember that they're the one band that I believe purposely called the last side of their 2-discer chaff, just acknowledging that it was filler material. I really like that. So Evol is pretty well received by the indie press. Christgau, who's made up with the band at this point, writes, "The good parts are so good that for a while there, I thought I was enjoying the bad parts." Kim Gordon has called this, possibly retrospectively, their goth album. Dave, I think you alluded to that in your tweet. But really, looking back, we've been saying it, Evol is the pivot point. Sonic Youth moved at this moment from being these art project weirdos into something more like an accepted rock band, and then sped their way to being an American indie institution over the next set of records in the next handful of years, which, as I mentioned, the next 4 Sonic Youth records are on the 1001 list. Thus, we will get to them a different time. And the last thought here is they sold more records with every album they put out pretty consistently, I think, from their beginning to this point and onward for the next 5 records, but they never sold a lot of records. They never had a breakthrough hit single or anything like that. So you get the sense that even now they are more inspirational to other rock bands than maybe directly influencing their sound. But there is something impressive about a band having this much cultural impact without really ever breaking through into the mainstream. With that story told, I say we get into some songs. What do you say, gents?
Let's do it.
Let's do this.
Awesome. Let us go and revisit the song we played at the top. It's called Tom Violence.
Dave mentioned earlier that this song is about Tom Verlaine. I heard the drum solo in the middle of the song and took the song to mean violence against the tom-toms.
Nice.
Yeah, he's pounding those things, man. I did notice that.
This is, when you were talking about this being cinematic music, I thought of 2 things. Number one, in the next song, we are literally in a cinematic state. I mean, Kim is referencing Hitchcock films, Strangers on a Train, Shadow of a Doubt. But Tom Violence, as soon as it starts, to me, this is very synesthetic music. I don't really consider myself someone with synesthesia, but always, as soon as this song kicks in, I am sort of in an almost astral flight over nighttime Germany, and I'm over rain-slicked urban streetscapes. There's a very visual component to this song for me, and always when I hear it, I'm seeing the same thing. It's a very intense record for me that immediately puts me in that frame of mind. As soon as this starts, there's just something about the interplay of the instruments and, what you call tossed off vocals. There is something that is that from that school of cool where he's singing more with an attitude that puts me in that frame of mind.
Don't put words in my mouth. No, actually, I agree. I know I said that the vocals are going to be my main issue, and I do wish they had some more instrumentals. But I think this is a great example of where their vocal approach and even their lyrical approach really works for me and serves what they're trying to do in the song. So I think this is an extremely successful, very cool song. I agree to what you said, Dave. It's very visual in my head, and this really hit me like a ton of bricks putting the record on for the first time. Not even sure exactly what my expectations were, but this certainly exceeded them immediately. I kind of get an image of a sinister factory at night, a nighttime factory of some sort. It's very cool. It's avant-garde filtered through a cohesive song. When they get to that first breakdown at like 1 minute where it just sounds like the crunch of metal or a car crash, I really liked that. And so I think they are able to do it. This is a great kickoff to the album. It feels like a mission statement. I don't think they're always able to recapture these heights, but here it really worked for me.
Something about the tempo of this song really attracts me to it. It's kind of sludgy, but it's kind of like danceable. And then immediately you hear that Steve Shelley's drumming. I mean, his drums themselves, he knows how to tune drums. No punk drummer knows how to tune their drums.
There are definitely some production choices. The drums are a great one. There are some production choices on this record, and they're noticed immediately. Rob, you're talking about it around like 1 minute, 1:10, where like you get the two guitars, and they're kind of just like, they're subtly moving around in space, but there are some very pro choices made in the way this record is recorded, developed, mixed, that come off very well. They make the record very effective, regardless of how much you like or dislike the cacophony.
Absolutely. Maybe we've underplayed it, but the sounds they are able to get out of two electric guitars, which I'm assuming is 100% what they're playing, are so wild and soundscapey and just new, for lack of a better term. So I think they deserve tons and tons of credit for stuff like that. Now, calling them the number one guitarists of all time jointly is hyperbolic and kind of ridiculous, but it is undeniably cool, influential, and new. And it's hard to be new on something like the electric guitar.
There's also something that happens here that is very crucial to this band moving forward that has not been a part of what they do, because it's all about context. When you were talking about Glenn Branca, I do agree. That stuff is kind of pretentious. I heard it. Check mark for trying something, but there's no context. In other words, when you have a song that is catchy, like Tom Violence, to me, that's a catchy song. The melody, the way the melody is put together and then supported by the instrumental work is critical. But then the mid-song breakdown, the meltdown, and the reconstitution of that meltdown gives the experimental factor context so that I can enjoy an actual like bizarro world pop song melting down and coming back together. That then from there, that builds to Daydream Nation and they become experts at that kind of thing. But that's beginning here in Evol.
Dave, how long does Steve Shelley remains the drummer of the band indefinitely from this point on?
Yes.
So
yeah.
I don't know pre-Sonic Youth, enough to comment, but something I definitely notice about this first track is the tempo doesn't change. I might speculate he does the most unpunk thing and play to a metronome, but it really helps this song build without having to leverage speed and volume, right? He sort of takes those off the table in a very professional way, a very like, hey, the song's in this pocket and it's going to be here.
Yeah. Steve Shelley is so crucial to this band's success aesthetically. From Confusion is Sex to Daydream Nation, that climb would have been impossible without Steve Shelley.
Right. And Phil, kind of what you're saying with this kind of like very neat tempo.
Neat, yeah.
With Kim Gordon's bass that's 3 notes and maybe a little bit behind the beat a little bit works really, really well together.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's a great example, too, because we keep referencing punk and punk movement, and I understand, of course, why they're associated with that. We talked about it in the story. But just to reemphasize, they were annoyed with instantly where punk went, which was just recycling ideas and wearing cool clothes. And they were so set on making something truly new. That's a cool place to even set your North Star, let alone to achieve it, right? So to me, it's like, it's very purposefully anti-trope, if you will. I think that, and when they say they liked things like hardcore punk, I'm sensing that they loved the ferocity of it, which I think this can be very ferocious music in this more slow, plodding, Iron Giant coming to kill you kind of way. It almost has a Black Sabbath quality to it in that sense. Okay, let's keep things a-rolling on to the next song on our focus list. It's called Shadow of a Doubt.
Swear it wasn't meant to be. Must have been a dream from 1,000 years ago. Swear I didn't mean it. Swear it wasn't meant to be. From the bottom of my heart, it's looking all over me. You take me and I'll take you. You kill him and I'll kill her. Swear I wasn't meant to be. Swear I didn't mean it. Kiss me. Kiss me in the shadow. Kiss me in the shadow of a doubt. Kiss me.
Kim Gordon never got better than this. This is the peak of her powers in the late 80s, because Kim, as opposed to the other members of the band, Kim tried out different looks and sounds. Like, for example, on Dirty, she sang with an almost like faux squeezing out diarrhea sort of sound to her voice that to me didn't work at all. And she's trying on different looks. But here, she's going against that beat you over the head sort of punk attitude with a whispered intensity that to me is spellbinding. Shadow of a Doubt. And also, she goes from that whisper to a scream in the breakdown that dynamically, we have texture here where before, these guys are finding their way. You'd never know that, she was just, grabbing a bass and just kind of going for it. She's really got her finger on the pulse of how, her performance is affecting the listener.
It's kind of like what you said with the last song. The song is just structurally sound. I like the kind of like Eastern Asian gamelan loop thing going on in the beginning and how that builds up into that kind of explosive middle, like you mentioned, Dave. At first, I was like, the vocals kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but this song, more than any other one on the album, grew on me the most.
It's the best song on the album.
Yeah, I called this my favorite track, although like I said, I do think Tom Violence is also quite good. So I agree with everything you said. I think Kim's whisper vocals serve what the song is very well. They serve the song, they fit, they help convey the creepy suspense and align with what the music's doing. They have this formula, and when it works, it goes great, which is they build a weird ambient loop, and it builds suspense, and it explodes like a powder keg, which it does here around 145-ish. And then the unsettling part, I think, comes from never really giving you a sense of resolve, which feels purposeful as part of their aesthetic.
So that's actually something interesting that I did sort of like feel about there. In general, I think the record, and maybe Sonic Youth in general, but I'll stay focused on this record. It has like a sort of plodding, lurking monster that's coming to get you but never quite gets there. But you're still always running, right? You're still always fatigued by it in a certain way. And I want to hear bliss. And all I mean by that is I want demonstrated to me that you could also make it happy. I only want to see one bolt of sunshine, right? And maybe that's on other records or at other times. There are times where I do feel like they're trapped in this nightmare, not like they're choosing to make the nightmare sound.
I'm certainly not a super fan, so Dave, you can check me on this one. But from what I've heard of those later records, they did get a lot more, I'll say poppy, but what I mean is more traditional rock and roll song structures and strum patterns and things and vocals. And it is, in a sense, less interesting. It's also more up my alley in terms of what I would normally listen to, frankly. But this, when I glanced through all the records in their entire catalog, this did feel like not only the jumping off point where the seeds of something were sown, but also the last gasp of something that was truly weird.
I don't think that. So I think the last gasp where things are truly weird is Daydream Nation. But to me, this is a very interesting album because it's a way station. I can't think about Evol as I consider myself a very true Sonic Youth fan, and I cannot think about or hear Evol without thinking about what came before it, and especially the couple records that were to come. I can't think about this without thinking about Sister and about Daydream Nation. It all leads up to Daydream. The aesthetics that are developed and created start here and build up to Daydream and do not come after Daydream. It's like something new happens with Goo, and after that it all slants on, I wouldn't say an inevitable downward trajectory. It just moves sideways and continues for the rest of their career from there. But it's that 3-record stretch, Evol, Sister, and Daydream.
Yeah, I did also hear, and it didn't sound like it was sour grapes exactly, but it might come off this way. I heard somebody in one of the documentaries I watched mention that he thought that Sonic Youth were a little less innovators and more very astute at picking up on trends and making them work through the lens of their band. Meaning that as the 90s turn over, they do become influenced by grunge music and start going in a slightly more of a straight line with that.
Yeah, that's totally true, but it only kind of starts happening with Dirty. When Dirty happens, they're kind of just behind the times. It's like you look at anyone like Sly and the Family Stone. They originated all this stuff. And then by the time the late 70s come around, he is following Prince and Madonna too, all the trendsetters, Bowie, once they start taking their cue from people who and bands that have come after them and have sort of picked up the thread that they initially laid down, that's when that echo chamber starts to eat its own tail. And it's the same with Sonic Youth, but it happens early in their career. It happens in the early 90s.
Speaking of echo chambers and stuff that's hard to listen to, let's go on to the next song. It's called Star Power.
Not a fan. This was the single.
This was the single, which is what's made me feel compelled to put it on this focus list. But I really don't care for it. I think that the band has put so much thought into sounds and textures, but the melody here and the vocal delivery is so tossed off. She's doing 100% root notes. She's perilously off key on those root notes. So in this case, it just struck me as a great example of just take the vocal out. you literally would have lost nothing. She is just singing the exact same thing that the bass is doing.
I don't know. I like this one too. I would have made it the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Ozzy with Black Sabbath. That's what Ozzy did.
I didn't even like this song enough to even like think about it and try to figure out why I don't like it. But to me, it's just a boring song.
Well, so for me, I particularly like the noise breakdown in this song. I feel like it gets particularly lost and off kilter, which makes the re-cohesion seem like, oh, wow, like maybe they were lost and they just found it again. Hard to tell. I also like the sort of riff it comes back in on at 3:30. It just sounds like some of the actual, sounds like some of the most concise, guitar section on the record, guitar writing on the record, and I just think it's right around 3:30. I just think it's a cool little riff that they play.
I like what the band is doing here. I just get annoyed by what she's doing. I think it's just super lazy. And I understand that fans of this kind of music are going to say things like, oh, the vocals are a fuck you to everything. But to me, it's just lazy. And a counterexample, to be clear, is a guy like Ozzy or Johnny Rotten, they clearly do not have beautiful singing voices. They're not looping in and out of melodies, but both are super compelling as vocalists. You're following their every move. This just feels like someone doing middle school karaoke.
I think the star of the show and star power is Steve Shelley, because the Paleolithic tribal mid-song drum breakdown, it feels like it's flown in from another song. And I love when they do stuff like that because, there is sort of a lazy pop thing that's going on with what she's doing. But then all of a sudden, the intensity with which the focus is pulled onto the tribal tom breakdown for Steve is really cool. And it's about context. Without that drum breakdown, the song would not be nearly as powerful.
It seems like Galaxy 500 stole their whole persona from this song.
Yeah, and Dean Wareham, another guy who I interviewed about the entirety of Galaxy 500 catalog, he was massively influenced by this stuff and by television, retroactively. Without that dynamic breakdown of what Steve was doing, I agree, this is not Kim's best moment under the lights, but Steve helps her out, I think, and gives it context.
Fair enough. Let's keep this rolling to the next song we're going to talk about. It's called Marilyn Moore.
Not their best moment.
Yeah, this is my actual low point. This song never gets off the ground. It sounds like they're trying to start a lawnmower. It sounds like I'm listening to my grandfather try to breathe. It's not good. And they've started other songs with those noisescapes, and I've been on board with it, but it just doesn't get anywhere. It just sputters and dies. I'm bored as hell.
I agree with that. I think if you compare, say, Tom Violence and Shadow of a Doubt, those go at times into a Shape of Jazz to Come sort of cacophonous, but interesting, very interesting place. This one, this was also my low light.
When Kim Gordon calls it their goth album, I think of this song. It sounds almost like a Nine Inch Nails song, which I think is what I liked about it. I did read somewhere that I think someone else wrote the lyrics to this song.
Lydia Lunch. Yeah, Lydia, she co-wrote Death Valley 69 on Bad Moon Rising, and that song is a classic. It's about Manson and that the Cult, that song is a total Stone Cold classic. You would never know that there was a co-writer on board this song. This just seems like the shitty afterbirth from that song.
It's funny when you mention Nine Inch Nails, because I did hear some things that in the very early days before this genre tag was very well defined, people were calling Sonic Youth industrial.
I hear that. Yeah, I hear that.
So it does kind of make sense. Yeah. All right, let's keep it rolling. We're going a little long here to the last song on our list. It is called, it might be called Expressway to Your Skull, or it might be called Madonna, Sean, and Me. Either way, here it is.
This is my favorite song in the
good.
selection. It's different than everything else. It has a big sound. It is triumphant. And I think if you were to say that any song on this album was them becoming more poppy, this one would be the first one I would think of.
Yeah, it feels the closest to a classic rock epic. You know how Christopher Nolan makes these movies that are subversive blockbusters? This feels like Sonic Youth taking Bob O'Reilly and trying to redo something with that kind of energy, but put through their aesthetic. So it is definitely cool.
That connective thing that they do where they, have a bizarro world take on classic rock, it starts here. And it's with that line, we're going to kill the California girls. I mean, upending classic rock on its head thing that they do, it starts there. And it's probably the peak of it too, because that is just such a killer line.
It is, and it's a standout, right? Like, you're kind of like, what did he just say?
So let's just dive into the title. As I mentioned, creates some instant confusion. On Spotify, the track is listed as Madonna, Sean, and Me, but every fan everywhere seems to know it as Expressway to Your Skull. So I just found that a little confusing to navigate, and it seems like the band leaned into that confusion by calling it different things on different releases, and even calling it different names on the same release. Sometimes it's also been called The Crucifixion of Sean Penn. And I just find that a little confusing. And I feel I should also mention to our younger listeners that Madonna and Sean Penn were married back then and were a major celebrity couple. And Sean Penn punched out a paparazzi at their wedding or something like that. This is big news back in the day, but it's kind of funny in the cold light of 2025. They don't seem like two people that would be together.
Also, unironically, they loved Madonna. And at that time, they came out with a record and a whole other side project called Ciccone Youth. And Madonna Ciccone, that's her last name. And they did an unironic cover of Into the Groove, another one of Burnin' Up. They really loved Madonna.
You know what? I read that because I remember seeing that there was a song, Marty, especially when I saw you were on this week. There was like a B-side on was it Ciccone Youth?
Yeah.
There was a B-side song called Tough Titty Rap. And that just sounds like something that like Marty would have to perform when like losing in fantasy football or something.
I bought that record at that time, and I love Tough Titty Rap.
I'm glad we got to talk about that even briefly.
Yeah.
So Dave, you had mentioned before that they toured with Neil Young for a time in the 80s, I believe it was. But
early 90s. So in 91, I saw them in Connecticut. And I saw them open for Neil, and they did Expressway to Your Skull. And on the ride back from Connecticut to Boston, I was going to BU at the time, my friend Jeremy and I pulled off at a rest stop to take a leak, and we saw a bus. And we were like, oh, man, what if that's Neil? Holy shit. We go in, fucking all of Sonic Youth is in there. Thurston Moore is trying to feed a crinkled up dollar bill into a vending machine, and we helped him smooth it out. And I told Thurston, if it wasn't for Daydream Nation and marijuana, I don't think we would have gotten through high school. And and he took my book. I always walked around with a pen and a notebook, and he drew a picture of a dude smoking a joint, and it said, and he wrote, "The kids are still all right." 1991.
That's awesome.
You still have that drawing somewhere?
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was really cool.
That's crazy. Crazy. That's a crazy story.
That's a great story, yeah. Well, I was going to say that Neil Young astutely picked up some hipster credit at the time and was quoted several times, I think, as saying this was the greatest guitar song of all time.
It is. I mean, just today, I was driving around Vermont with the windows down. This song cranked with my wife and my 6-year-old in the back and doing headbanging stuff to this song, because that breakdown where, the beginning part where it goes quiet and then just a smash of, the song going crazy, the dynamic still works so well.
It's definitely cool. I do think it shows that they have a deep understanding of classic rock tropes. And when I heard the Neil Young connection, I thought of songs like Cowgirl in the Sand as well. I certainly would not go as far as to say it's the greatest guitar song of all time. That sounds a little ridiculous, but I did enjoy it. It is, I should mention, intended to be the record closer. On the digital versions, there is another song tacked on called Bubblegum, right?
It's a Kim Fowley cover. And by the way, Kim Fowley is now the third person who's been canceled on this episode. Danny Elfman from Oingo Boingo, there was some weird sex shit. Kim Fowley, weird sex shit, canceled. And there was somebody else, and I can't remember who it was. Oh, Swans. The Swans.
It's very believable. But is it enough for us to say that this is a must-listen record? I think we've gabbed enough. Now it is time to vote. Must you listen to Sonic Youth's Evol before you perish? I'm going to throw it first to Marty.
All right. So, this album maybe isn't my personal favorite album, but I recognize its importance, and I would recommend that our listeners listen to this album. And so I'm going to say yes, it definitely belongs on the list.
Excellent. That's one yes vote. We'll send it next to Dave.
Unquestionably, this is a crucial record. It's not Sonic Youth's best, but it's, one of their best, and it's got some classic songs on it.
Okay. We've heard from two. Now on to Phil.
So it's been great talking shop on the record, learning a lot more about the history of Sonic Youth and the context. I definitely knew a lot less about Sonic Youth than I thought I did coming into this week. But if I'm being honest, I'm still not there. It was cool. It was interesting. Maybe I'll listen to it more, but it's still over my head in the way that, some great jazz is still over my head. I turn it on and I'm like, nah, I just still don't get it. So for me, I'm looking forward to the other records. I'll give this one a few more listens, but I'm passing on Sonic Youth's Evol.
Wow. Okay. It's 2-1. And I shall be casting my vote now. I was very conflicted, even coming into this week. But I have to say that I'm going to land on yes, you should listen to it. I'm more or less with Marty. This is not really my lane. I did find things to like here. But for me, it was kind of like 50-50, like, don't like. I would have to say I like some of the other Sonic Youth stuff I've heard better. Perhaps that is because it is more straight down the line rock and roll music, whatever that says about me. However, learning about the record helped because it's a pivotal record, because it feels like the start of something. And number two is, I do have to say, it does not sound like anything else I had personally heard. So for those reasons, I think it is worth your time to give it a listen. There's not a lot of new ground being broken in this thing called music. This feels like it deserves a spot for that reason.
So, Phil, you know what this means, right?
I'm a loser.
Yeah, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Not the first time, nor the last. The vote is closed. Sonic Youth, you made it, baby. You'll have a scant 4 more chances to go onto our lauded list. I am going to say again that I think 5 is too many for almost any band, so I doubt all of them will make it in our eventual vote. But there you have it. Now, before we get to the mailbag and our homework for next week, I just want to give a very special thanks to Discograffiti Dave Gebro. Dave, What should listeners be looking out for from you coming up soon? Plug away, baby.
This week, Bruce Johnston from the Beach Boys, there's an interview. There's going to be concurrent series on Billy Joel, on Jefferson Airplane, on Graham Nash and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and the Beach Boys.
You know, I've got some theories on The Stranger. Maybe we could talk shop when you get there.
Let them roll. I love The Stranger. Please.
Okay, that's for another time. But I got to say, listeners, if you're the people that are yelling at us for not knowing who Galaxy 500 is or about Sonic Youth's side project referencing Madonna, Dave Gebro's Discography podcast is definitely the podcast for you. He's the hardest working man in podcasting. I don't know how he does it. So, Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. Always love to talk to you and hear your thoughts on these things.
Thank you, Rob. And I really do love you, man.
Love you too, buddy. All right, then we have but two things left to do. The microphone's going to stay with me, and I'm going to dip my hand in the old mailbag. We love getting letters from y'all. First one I have is from Valerie, hailing from Jacksonville, North Carolina. She writes, I just found y'all like a month ago. I've been cherry picking based on familiarity first, and as a small town Southern Baptist raised proud aging hipster born in 1980, same here, Valerie, I feel like I've found my people. Though I wish you'd get some more girls on the show. We'd love more girls on the show, Valerie, please. Girls with a little bit of broadcasting experience or maybe just a microphone sitting at their desk, give us a call. Anyway, she goes on. The specific mix of snark, middle school humor, and well-researched opinions has got me chain-smoking American spirits till 2 a.m. on my porch, not realizing how immersed I am in the conversation. Anyway, I wanted to write because I grew up about 15 minutes outside of Jacksonville, North Carolina, hometown of Ryan Adams. I didn't know him. He's like 5 years older than me, but he was widely known as an extraordinarily talented shitbag. To date, most people here still don't know who he is. Bigger point is that you were actually kind to my hometown of Jacksonville. It is a cesspool of chain restaurants, pawn shops, tattoo parlors, vape shops, and strip clubs. If we have to tell anyone where we're from, most of us just say Wilmington, North Carolina, because Jacksonville is such an embarrassment. I just want to point out, listeners, that this person is saying we were too nice to their crappy hometown.
Oh, I thought she was saying we were too nice to Ryan Adams.
You know what? Maybe she was saying all that.
By the way, also canceled, number 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He got hard canceled. It was pretty deeply troubling.
I think everyone knew he was an asshole, right?
Yeah. That's also why it was probably a little harder to climb back. Everybody hated working with him already.
Yeah.
Right. All right, we got one more here. Goody from Akron, Ohio writes, hey, gang, I've written a few times before, just being a snarky putz, giving y'all a hard time for being Fish and Ween fans. It was lovely to listen to both sides of the coin on Isaac Hayes' Hot Buttered Soul. Even though I'm a huge fan of the album, I can see why the vamping and long, drawn-out songs just couldn't get to you. So here comes the fun part. After work recently, I was looking at YouTube and I saw a video of David Byrne going through Amoeba Records on their What's in My Bag series. And lo and behold, David picked up a soundtrack by Isaac Hayes. It is a different record, but he led into a joyous conversation about Isaac Hayes' By the Time I Get to Phoenix, about how much David Byrne loves the song, loves the intro, and how it blew him away. Phil, what do you have to say to that? You were on that episode.
Well, I mean, I also love a long spoken word intro. I forget where I landed on By the Time I Get to Phoenix, but, I do remember a long spoken word intro that set the song up in a way that was very different than, I believe, Glenn Campbell or whatever the popular cover I had heard. So... Yeah,
as I recall, it wasn't on that episode. You guys complained about the length of these songs. I think very rightfully so. Even Goody, our email writer, acknowledges that. But we did ultimately vote it on to the list, except I think Curmudgeon Tom. But it did make it on the list. I believe that's correct. So we love when you email us anything that's in your heart, anything that's on your mind, where we got it right, where we got it wrong, or your personal connection to any of this music. We love hearing it all. Send it all over to us at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. And now We have but one thing left to do, is to get our homework for next week. Tom has shipped the Albinator over to me. The switch no longer works. I have to hit it with a drumstick to give us a pick. So without further ado, next week we shall be listening to it's another obscure noise artist. His name is Paul McCartney, and the band Wings.
That's a great one.
And the album is Band on the Run.
Oh, what a guilty pleasure.
At my age, nothing is a guilty pleasure anymore.
Anywhere you can find pleasure, just
That's
take
right.
it.
Excellent. I'm going to get the bends going from Sonic Youth to Paul McCartney, man.
Yeah, you might.
That's a good damn leap.
Okay, well, we hope you listen along to Paul McCartney / Wings, Band on the Run. Is this a Paul McCartney album or is it a Wings? I think it's a Wings album.
It's a Wings album.
Band.
Well, at that point, it was only three of them. It was Paul and Linda and Denny Lane. That's it.
Denny Lane, guitar player from JC Superstar, as I recall.
The band fell apart and they went to Jamaica kind of overnight. It's a weird story.
Wait, is Denny Lane also the guy that does the Reelin' in the Year solo, or is that different JC?
That's Denny Diaz.
No, but there was some other JC Superstar connection to one of those Steely Dan records. Anyway.
No, the JC Superstar band is the Grease band that played with Joe Cocker. I don't think there's a Steely Dan connection.
Well, I'll go dig into the Can't Buy a Thrill.
Tune in and find out.
If only we had recorded this material. Okay, we hope you listen along to Band on the Run with us. And join us again next week. For everyone here at 1001 Album Complaints, I have been Rob.
I'm Marty.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Dave.
Boosh.